Welcome, villagers, to the village hidden in the stories. I'm your guide, AllKage, the creator and author of all the what-if stories you see on this channel, with your awesome suggestions, of course. I write, edit, and produce every story you hear, so if you're wondering who made it, it's me. I hope you enjoy today's video. Be sure to leave your what-if ideas in the comments and subscribe if you're new. Today's story is What If Naruto Was in the MCU Part 2. If you'd like to support the channel, check out my Patreon, link in the description. For just $5, you can get early access to full-text transcripts, thumbnails, ad-free videos, and updates for my what-ifs. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this what-if. Part 2, A Mutant's War. Eventually, the silence circled back around, and Natasha was the one who broke it. So, Darwin is next. Her voice returned to business, but still carried that soft thread woven through. Naruto gave a nod, shifting his gaze toward the horizon. Yeah, I've been wondering when you'd bring him up. He rubbed at the back of his neck. He's the real wild card. I still can't track him, not even with clones. If anyone could disappear off the map, it's him. Natasha pulled a tablet from the side compartment, flicking it on with a swipe. His profile lit up in the dim cabin, along with the scant scraps of intel S.H.I.E.L.D. had been able to dig up. You think he'll be the same? She asked. Naruto paused, his smile fading a little, a thoughtful look replacing it. I don't know, he admitted. Darwin's whole ability is about survival. I don't know if the same guy I knew would still be under all that instinct. Natasha didn't say anything for a moment, just letting the weight of that settle. Guess there's only one way to find out, Naruto finished, sitting back against the ramp, watching as the last of the sun vanished below the ocean. Yeah, Natasha agreed, eyes flicking back to the tablet, one more. But the quiet between them wasn't so guarded anymore. The walls were lower now, and both of them knew it. The conversation drifted on, slow and easy. As the sky outside the Quinjet dimmed into a soft navy, the stars were starting to break through the blanket of clouds, casting faint light into the quiet cabin. Natasha sat back against one of the side panels, legs stretched out, her head lightly tilted against the cold metal behind her. Her usual guarded air wasn't there, not fully. She looked more at ease. Naruto noticed the difference, the way her eyes weren't so sharp, her shoulders not so tense. They flipped through what little files S.H.I.E.L.D. had on Darwin, cross-referencing sightings and old mission notes, the conversation pausing and picking up in waves as they thought through each detail. He's not the type to hide out in cities. Natasha muttered, scrolling past a cluster of cold, digital maps. Too many variables, too much noise, he would have stayed somewhere quiet. Naruto leaned back, resting his head on the inner wall, watching the glow of the screen reflect faintly in her eyes. Yeah, he was always that way, he mumbled. Solitude suited him, he was never one to stay around others unless he had to. His gaze drifted from the screen to her again, quietly observing how open she looked, at least compared to the woman he first met on this mission. It wasn't like her to let her emotions linger on the surface for long, but here, away from the world for the moment, she wasn't hiding them as hard. It made him wonder just how long she'd been carrying everything alone, the Red Room. Laura, all of it. You know, he started after a moment, a small smile playing at his lips, you're a lot more human when you're not trying so hard to be a weapon. Natasha's eyes cut sideways at him, her expression unreadable for a second, but then her lips twitched upward, the smallest hint of amusement breaking through. And you're a lot less annoying when you're not trying to be a clown. He let out a soft laugh, letting his head fall back again. A comfortable silence hung between them for a while, the hum of the Quinjet filling the space until Natasha's voice drifted in again, thoughtful now. If I were him, if I wanted to be left alone for good, but still close enough to watch, I wouldn't leave the island. Naruto blinked, sitting up slightly. You think he's still here? She nodded slowly, almost piecing the thought together out loud. Where would a man like that hide? Somewhere quiet, isolated, somewhere he wouldn't have to deal with anyone, but could still keep an eye on the world, or at least you. Naruto's mind spun for a moment, retracing all the places on the island, every structure, every shadowed path, every corner they'd searched and passed. Then it clicked. Under, Naruto said aloud, eyes sharpening. Not on the island, under it. Natasha turned toward him fully now, sitting up straighter. The water, she finished for him. Naruto was already moving to the front of the Quinjet, flipping the radar and scanner systems back on. His thoughts ran faster than the systems could boot. It made perfect sense. Darwin's abilities would let him adapt to any environment. If anyone could survive in the ocean, right beneath them, unnoticed for who knows how long, it would be him. He was here the whole time, Naruto muttered under his breath, almost in disbelief. His gaze flicked back toward Natasha for a moment, catching the same realization written across her face. But her expression held more than that. It wasn't the cold, tactical stare of a soldier anymore. It was relief, maybe even hope. Naruto held her gaze for a second longer than he meant to, a quiet thought brushing his mind. And even though the mission wasn't over, and the next step meant finding a friend who might not be the same anymore, for the first time in a long while, Naruto felt the weight on both their shoulders shift, lighter, somehow. Let's go find him, he said quietly, his voice steady. Natasha nodded once, grabbing her gear as the engines hummed back to life. The moment had passed, but the unspoken trust between them lingered. The Quinjet hummed steady and smooth through the open sky, gliding high above the clouds, the island stretching out beneath them like a quiet, green jewel cradled by endless ocean. From this height, the world looked peaceful, the forest spread wide like an unbroken sea of emerald. The small buildings Naruto had helped shape dotting the landscape, and the natural cliffs and coves cutting sharp and proud into the surrounding waves. For a moment, Naruto just sat back, arms crossed, eyes half-lidded as he soaked in the sight. His island. The place he had carved out from nothing, built not just from raw power, but from the stubborn belief that there was still a place in this world for people like them, the outcasts, the feared, the forgotten. A place to belong. But then, his eyes shifted, the air around his pupils rippled as his Rinna Sharingan bloomed open, the tomo spinning lazily at first until the deeper focus set in. The world changed in an instant. The sharp lines of the terrain softened, layers peeled away as chakra sight overtook normal vision. Colors vanished, replaced by the ebb and flow of energy currents, pockets of movement lighting up the earth and ocean like stars in a night sky. But when he looked beneath the island, deeper past the rocky seabed, a dark pocket of space stood out, the faint shape of a cavern, tucked perfectly in the hollow beneath the island's floor, large enough for someone to make a home of. Naruto narrowed his gaze, focusing harder, but his lips tugged into a faint line of frustration. No chakra, he muttered under his breath. That's one part one dislike about coming here, can't find everything with these eyes. He leaned back in his seat, eyes still sharp with thought. His mind ran through possibilities, working through the theory like a puzzle. Maybe with enough training, a different way of sensing, of understanding this world's natural energy, he could expand the limits of his sight beyond chakra. That would be useful. More than useful. It'd make sure no one could hide, not even in a world where chakra barely existed. A small smile touched his lips at the thought. Another goal for later. Finally turning toward Natasha, he blinked the pattern from his eyes and said aloud, "Our guess was probably right, there's a cave deep under the ocean floor, big enough to live in." Natasha, seated at the controls, let out a soft exhale, her head tilting slightly as she glanced at him, her lips curving into a dry, amused smile. "You know, she quipped lightly, every time I think I've seen the extent of your bag of tricks, you pull out another one. How many abilities do you actually have? Naruto gave a low, quiet chuckle at that, the edge of his smirk lifting a bit higher as he stepped closer. I've got enough, he answered smoothly, the playful confidence never leaving his voice. She huffed a quiet breath through her nose, shaking her head slightly, but the amusement stayed, her walls thinner than ever as she glanced back toward the view outside. All right. Smart guy, she said, a brow arching. So we know where he is, but unless you've got a ship sitting around that can handle deep-sea pressure, I'm guessing you don't expect us to just swim down there. Naruto's smirk grew a little wider, the glint of a challenge flickering in his eyes. Who needs a ship, he said, casually placing his hands in his pockets. I can take us down there a few different ways. She turned her head, giving him a look somewhere between skeptical and curious. Oh yeah? Yeah, he nodded, voice easy and smooth. I can either do it the cool way or the simple way, your call. Natasha let out a low chuckle at that, folding her arms, her gaze lingering on him, the ease. The confidence, the strange way he always seemed to bend the impossible into something casual. Let's hear the options first, and then I'll decide just how reckless I'm feeling. Naruto's smile softened, the tension of the mission briefly washing away in the warmth of the moment, before he gestured lazily toward the controls. Either way, get ready, we're going swimming. Naruto leaned back against the console, arms crossing loosely, watching Natasha's brow rise with the smallest glint of curiosity. His smirk lingered as he listed off the choices, each one sounding more impossible than the last, but his tone made it clear he meant every word. Option 1, he began, holding up a finger, I can use a technique to make use pass through water like air, basically making the water pressure ineffective. He watched Natasha's head tilt slightly, her curiosity sharpening even as her expression stayed cool and measured. Option 2, Naruto lifted another finger, a bit more casual now, I can summon something called a Susanoo. Think of it like a giant, armored samurai avatar that surrounds me. Big enough for two. Strong enough to handle whatever the ocean throws at us. At that, his grin widened, expecting the mix of disbelief and intrigue. And option 3, Natasha prompted, folding her arms again. Naruto chuckled, tapping his fingers once against the console. I could just split the ocean, he said, like it was the most casual thing in the world. Separate it from the island for a few minutes, give us a clear path right to the cave. There was a pause. Natasha blinked, her lips parting slightly before the corner of her mouth twitched into a half-smile, somewhere between impressed and incredulous. You really don't do anything halfway, do you? Naruto shrugged, the confidence in his voice never faltering. Why settle for halfway when you've got options? She huffed, shaking her head slightly, though the small crack of real amusement in her expression lingered longer than usual. All right, show off, let's do it the least destructive way first. Naruto gave a playful bow of his head, turning toward the back of the jet to start preparing the jutsu, his mind already running through the setup while the faintest thought drifted in, she had definitely changed over the few days. And for once, he didn't mind the quiet that followed. The soft hum of the Quinjet's engines filled the air, holding steady as it hovered high above the crashing waves surrounding Mutant Island. The sky stretched out wide and open, but below, the deep ocean waited, silent, black, and endless. Naruto stood near the open hatch, his eyes opened with the Renisharingen. With one hand seal he focused on his chakra, and in seconds the glow of blue chakra overtook them. Kamui, muttered Naruto under his breath, the jutsu complete with that one word. Natasha, standing beside him, watched his hands work with an unspoken curiosity, her arms crossed, but her eyes showing the same quiet trust that had begun to grow between them over these last few missions. The jutsu will keep us mostly intangible as we go down, mainly to the water just in case something comes up, or Darwin doesn't seem keen on talking," Naruto explained, glancing over his shoulder at her. Natasha gave a small nod, not questioning the logic. By now she had learned better. When it came to things Naruto claimed he could do, the impossible was usually just step one. "Ready?" he asked, looking down to the water with a grin. She placed on a simple helmet before answering. Just because they could pass through like ghosts didn't mean she didn't want to see. "Born ready." Without waiting for the usual countdown or ceremony, Naruto stepped out first, his body free-falling smoothly from the hatch and slicing into the ocean below. Natasha followed a half-second later, but unlike what she expected, she couldn't feel the water. In fact, she couldn't tell she was in it until she had opened her eyes. The descent began. They drifted lower and lower, carried by gravity. Above them, the surface grew distant, a bright, unreachable ceiling. Below, only endless dark stretched out. Strange shapes flickered at the edge of sight, deep-sea creatures, alien and unbothered by the human visitors. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, not between them, it was thoughtful. Natasha glanced once at Naruto, noticing how steady he looked even here, where most would be panicked. He, in turn, caught the glance and offered a quiet smirk, breaking the stillness for a moment. "You sure you don't want me to carry you the rest of the way, princess?" Natasha let out a soft snort, shaking her head. "You'd have to catch me first." The ease of their exchange hung in the space between them, and for a brief moment the pressure of their mission, the brotherhood, the search for Darwin, all faded. But as the ocean floor began to rise toward them in the distance, dark shapes shifting in the sediment, Naruto's eyes sharpened. His Sharingan flared slightly, even beneath the water-filtered light. "We're getting close." And in the quiet stillness, somewhere in the dark beyond their field of vision, something else stirred. The descent continued in steady silence, the ocean darkening around them the deeper they drifted. Naruto drifted slightly ahead, his hands folded behind his head in his usual casual posture, even here. Natasha moved beside him, her breathing steady, eyes sharp and shifting, always scanning the waters around them. "You ever think about staying in one place for more than a week?" she asked after a few long minutes, her voice cutting through the thick quiet. Naruto gave a small chuckle, the sound muffled but easygoing. "Haven't really had the luxury, trouble's usually faster than me." "You don't seem like the type to run from it." "I'm not, but trouble's got a habit of catching up to people, whether they're ready or not." There was a quiet hum of understanding from Natasha, not an agreement, not a disagreement, just shared experience. For a moment, the conversation drifted again, the silence not unwelcome. But then, Naruto's head tilted ever so slightly. His Sharingan flickered, scanning the shifting darkness ahead. The water felt different, not in temperature or depth, but movement. Something was cutting through the ocean current. "Hold up," his voice dropped into a more serious tone, sharp enough that Natasha immediately slowed her pace, muscles tensing. Naruto's eyes locked forward, the faint glow of his vision stretching farther than normal sight could hope to reach. "Something's coming." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their own controlled breathing and the faint ripple of water brushing past them. But then, a shift, the water pressure buckled for just a second, bubbles twisted unnaturally in the dark. And then it appeared, a shadow, massive and gliding, its outline jagged and wrong. It moved slow at first, circling them, the water parting slightly under its sheer size. Its eyes glowed dim yellow against the black ocean backdrop. Natasha's hand shifted to her sidearm out of reflex, but Naruto's hand lifted subtly to halt her. "Let's not startle it, whatever it is, it's not here by accident." The creature drifted closer, steady but deliberate, testing them. For the first time on this mission, Naruto's easy smirk faded, replaced by quiet focus as his eyes tracked its every motion. The calm before the storm had ended. something had found them first. As the shadow loomed ever closer, Naruto's gaze sharpened, his senses fully locking onto the monstrous presence now circling them in the dark. He let out a dry, almost bitter chuckle under his breath. TCH, lately I'm starting to hate being the one hunted. Before another thought could form, the creature struck. A flash of movement, too fast and too powerful for its size, and Naruto barely had time to brace before a massive fin-like limb swept through the water, crashing into him like a tidal wave. The impact sent him hurtling through the dark, spinning downward at high speed, deeper into the crushing depths. For a moment, the ocean swallowed him whole, his body a blur of motion as the water dragged him even farther away from Natasha. But as he steadied himself mid-descent, his Renasharingan caught the full, unhidden form of the creature. A monstrous deep-sea predator, twisted by mutation, its body was a blend of sleek, armored scales and ragged, patchy skin. Its maw split open unnaturally wide, lined with jagged bioluminescent teeth that glowed like a deep-sea lantern, the light flickering sickly across its scarred, lopsided face. Its eyes were empty, not mindless, but instinct-driven, cold and old. The kind of thing that was never meant to meet the surface. "Well, aren't you a face only a mother could love?" Naruto muttered, even as the beast twisted its body to zero in on Natasha, now isolated. Her heart rate stayed steady, but her body moved on sheer instinct as the beast approached. The creature cut through the water slower now, the confidence of a predator closing in on cornered prey. She leveled her weapon, even knowing full well the bullets would be useless at this depth, especially against something of this size. It paused, the way all hunters do, studying her, letting her feel the weight of the moment. Then it charged. The ocean blurred, its massive jaws wide, the glowing rows of teeth a beacon of finality. Natasha's legs tensed, but there was nowhere to move, nowhere to swim fast enough. But just as the creature lunged, a blur of gold and black tore across her field of vision. With a crack, Naruto was back, his boot colliding perfectly beneath the monster's maw. Holding the full weight of its deadly bite back with his leg locked firm. His body was braced, the force vibrating through him, but his face wore a familiar crooked smirk, one that Natasha could almost feel even through her helmet. "That wasn't very nice," he muttered to the creature, shifting his leg slightly, muscles tightening. "What, did you really think you could deal with me that quickly, big guy?" The beast growled, thrashing its head against the pressure, but Naruto didn't budge. He tilted his head just slightly, his smirk growing wider. "Well, think again, just who the hell do you think I am?" With a sharp twist and a burst of chakra through his leg, Naruto kicked the creature away, sending it flying backward through the dark waters, far enough to buy them space. He turned slightly, glancing back at Natasha, his tone softer but still carrying that signature confidence. "You alright, partner?" Natasha's breathing eased, the immediate tension washing off her like the rolling dark around them. She gave a short nod, steady but sincere, even if her pulse was still catching up. "Yeah, I'm good." For a second her eyes lingered on him, noting how easily he stood between her and the monster, not as some reckless shield, but as if it was second nature to protect the people beside him. Naruto turned fully toward her, his usual grin flickering into something more genuine, something just a little softer under all the bravado. "Heh, good. Would have been pretty awkward if I had to carry you the rest of the way," he teased, trying to break the tension. "You'd drop me halfway," she quipped back, a rare little smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. But the moment didn't last long. The deep tremble of water shifting signaled the creature was already circling for another strike. Naruto's eyes flicked toward the movement, and his tone shifted back to sharp and focused. "It's not giving up, figures." Natasha raised her gun slightly again, her voice more serious but calm. "So what's the plan, genius?" Naruto's eyes narrowed, thinking fast. He glanced at the angle the creature was approaching from, the shifts in water pressure around them, and the rocky seafloor below. He floated back toward her, the water calm for the brief moment between attacks. "All right, here's the move," he said, voice low but confident. "I'll draw it away, keep it busy, you head toward the trench below, scan for any caves. If Darwin's alive, he'll be hiding deep, probably close to the rock walls." Natasha raised an eyebrow. "Splitting up down here, that's bold." "Trust me," Naruto answered simply. "I'll be fine, that thing can't adapt faster than me." There was a pause, her gaze lingering on him. "Be careful, Naruto." He flashed her a grin, this time one that held just the right edge of sincerity. "I always am." And with that, the water around him pulsed. His chakra flaring as he shot forward, a streak of movement cutting through the deep as he charged back at the creature, ready to keep it away from her. Natasha turned, activating her gear and beginning to descend toward the trench, heart steady but her thoughts lingering on him longer than she would have expected. The deeper Natasha moved, the darker the ocean around her grew, the faint shimmer of light from above was long gone, swallowed by the cold silence of the abyss. The pressure tightened around her suit, the flicker of her display screen and her own breathing the only company she had as she guided herself downward, scanning for any sign of the cave Naruto had seen. But even as her eyes stayed sharp, her mind wandered. That moment, just minutes ago, when the creature charged her, it hadn't left her head. The way Naruto appeared out of nowhere, placing himself between her and something that could have torn her apart in seconds. No hesitation, no second guessing, just calm, unshakable confidence. He always did that. From the moment they'd met, he acted like nothing could really touch him. There was no cocky pride behind it, no desperate need to prove himself. It was like he had already faced worse, and the world just hadn't caught up yet. And the strangest part, she believed it. Natasha frowned, glancing down toward the dark expanse below. Most people who ran on instinct like that were either dead or broken by now. But Naruto, no, somehow, the more he got hurt, the more human he looked, not weaker, not jaded, just real. Her grip tightened slightly on her sidearm, feeling the weight of it steady her drifting thoughts. "Why do you keep doing that?" she thought, more to herself than him. "You're not a soldier, you don't even owe me anything." And yet there he was, again and again. A quiet breath left her lips, misting the inside of her helmet for a second before the suit's systems cleared it away. "It's almost annoying." A light blinked on her scanner, a faint hollow in the ocean floor, the cave. She paused, giving the coordinates a second glance, before her calm crackled to life. "Looks like you were right, Blondie," she murmured, her voice low but warmer than usual. "Caves here." And for a second, as the silence of the ocean pressed in again, she let her thoughts finish the part she didn't say aloud. "I'm starting to trust you a little too easily, you know." Natasha guided herself toward the mouth of the cave, the darkness inside like an open void compared to the endless stretch of ocean behind her. She moved carefully, weapons lowered, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of her helmet's visor. The further in she floated, the quieter it became, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. And then, there he was. Curled into the hollow of the rock wall. Half submerged in the shadows, was Darwin. His body had shifted, gills lined his neck, skin slightly rougher, perfectly adapted to survive at these crushing depths. He didn't flinch, didn't move to attack, just watched her, his eyes calm but sharp. "You can come out, Darwin," Natasha spoke softly, her voice steady through the comms. "I'm not here to hurt you." There was a long pause, and for a moment she wondered if he'd even answer. But eventually, the man stirred, pushing himself upright with the slow, natural motion of someone who'd been living out here far too long. "You always send suits to the bottom of the ocean to say hello," his voice was dry, tinged with fatigue and a little humor. though his guard remained up. Natasha relaxed a fraction, lowering her weapon completely. Only for special people, she paused. And you're on that list, whether you like it or not. Darwin's eyes narrowed, studying her through the dark, as if trying to peel back her words for any hint of hidden motives. You're with Naruto, aren't you? He asked finally, voice quieter now. I sensed him earlier, that idiot still recruiting strays. Natasha let out a small exhale, her lips tugging at the corner. Still trying to save people who don't want saving, she admitted. Same as always. For a while, the cave settled into silence again. Darwin looked away, eyes drifting toward the mouth of the cave. To the black ocean beyond. I came here to be left alone, he muttered, voice almost lost in the water. That's why I hid this deep. And now you've got more than the ocean after you, Natasha replied quietly. A certain mutant group is looking for you, they want your DNA, and they don't ask for permission. That finally earned a shift in his expression. A flicker of the old soldier behind the worn face. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious, he said, more to himself than her. Then his gaze lifted back to her, sharp and aware. How many others? 2 so far, you'd make 3. Another beat of silence stretched between them before Darwin gave a slow nod, his body slowly adjusting back to a more human state. Gills closing, skin softening. Let me guess, Naruto sent you down first to soften me up? Natasha gave a soft, knowing smile, something like that. And for the first time in a long time, Darwin let out a quiet, dry chuckle. Tell him I'm getting too old for this. She tapped her calm, her voice light but firm. You can tell him yourself. Darwin stretched his limbs a bit, his body still subtly shifting as his biology adjusted for the swim back up. He lingered for a moment in the cave, leaning against the wall, letting the weight of the conversation settle. I've got no problem with Naruto, he finally said, his voice lower now, more sincere. The guy's heart's always been in the right place. Hell, I wouldn't even be breathing if it wasn't for him, not the first time, not the second. Natasha tilted her head slightly at that, but said nothing, letting him speak. I just needed some quiet, Darwin continued. After those first few fights, the world felt too loud, too violent. Coming down here was the only place I could think straight, but he let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Guess peace never lasts long, huh? Natasha's expression softened beneath her helmet. It usually doesn't, she agreed quietly. After another pause, Darwin gave a short nod to himself, pushing off from the wall. All right, he said, the firmness returning to his voice. I'll come up, even I know better than to sit back while some group starts picking us off one by one. He glanced over at her, a glint of old stubborn resolve in his eyes. No one fights alone, right? Natasha's lips curved into the faintest of smiles behind her visor, right. The two swam back toward the open sea, Darwin moving with practiced ease, his body still adapting to the depth, Natasha pacing him all the way. When they finally cleared the cave and emerged back into open water, the sight that met them was something else entirely. Naruto, hovering mid-ocean, looked like he didn't have a care in the world. The massive sea creature that had attacked them earlier, a leviathan of scales, jagged teeth, and limbs as long as buildings, was now circling him, thrashing and snapping. But Naruto danced around its attacks almost lazily. Every time it lunged, Naruto flipped or shifted at the last moment, sometimes landing a blow on its snout or jaw with enough strength to send it reeling like it weighed nothing. He wasn't fighting like someone in danger, he was fighting like someone entertaining himself. Darwin stopped mid-swim, brow raising. Is he playing with that thing? Natasha folded her arms, watching the same scene. Yeah, that's pretty normal for him. Naruto finally noticed them floating off in the distance and, mid-flip, shot them a sharp grin beneath the water, his chakra shielding keeping his body and voice steady as the comms kicked in. "About time, thought I'd have to break this poor thing's jaw before you two came back." The Leviathan surged toward him again, and Naruto sidestepped underwater as easily as if he were walking on air, delivering a punch that sent the creature tumbling backward in a spiral of bubbles. Darwin shook his head slowly, half impressed, half baffled. Some things never change. Natasha's gaze lingered on Naruto a moment longer, the usual coldness in her eyes softening just slightly. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Some things don't." Breaking the surface, the three of them took in the sharp, salty air, the sun hanging low over the horizon as if the whole world had been waiting for them to resurface. Naruto, already back in his usual playful calm, raised 2 fingers, and with a soft pulse of chakra, they vanished from the waves in an instant. A blink later, their boots landed squarely on the solid ground of the mainland, the humid ocean breeze replaced by the steady warmth of the island's heart. Darwin stretched his arms, glancing back toward the sea, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his mouth for the first time in a while. "Guess I've got some catching up to do," he said, turning toward Naruto and Natasha. "Some old faces still hanging around the island, haven't seen them in a while, probably owe a few people an explanation too." Naruto gave him a light nod, hands slipping into his pockets. "Take your time, we'll need everyone sharp soon, but the island's still yours as much as anyone's." Darwin gave them a casual wave before heading off down one of the trails, leaving Natasha and Naruto standing in the soft quiet, the weight of the past few days catching up all at once. Naruto stretched his arms over his head, letting out a satisfied sigh. "You know, for all the action we've been through, I think the part I've hated most is the food." He glanced sideways at Natasha, flashing her that familiar crooked smile. "What do you say we grab some ramen first before even thinking about the next mission?" "My treat." Natasha raised an eyebrow, folding her arms as if to feign disapproval. Though the small, almost unnoticeable twitch at the corner of her mouth gave her away. "Ramen, huh, after everything, that's the first thing on your mind?" Naruto shrugged, still grinning. "Hey, a man's got priorities, besides, I fight better on a full stomach." Natasha let the silence linger for a beat, her gaze flicking away toward the sea, then finally she nodded, her voice softer than usual but edged with quiet amusement. "Alright, ramen first." Naruto gave her a playful nudge with his shoulder as they started walking. "That's the spirit." After their ramen spree, the two made their way back to the Quinjet, already planning for the next and hopefully last mission. The Quinjet drifted steady and silent above the clouds, the soft glow of its interior consoles the only light cutting through the dark cabin. Paris wasn't far now, just distant city lights blinking faint on the horizon, but the weight of uncertainty still hung in the air between them. Natasha sat at the small table toward the back, flipping through files on her tablet, each new document offering just as little as the last. No real leads, no clear location. Just fragments of sightings, blurry photos, and unconfirmed intel. "She's good at disappearing," Natasha muttered, half to herself, half to Naruto, who sat slouched a few seats away, arms crossed, watching the flicker of the map across the front display. "Mystique, right?" Naruto's voice was low, thoughtful. "I've seen people who could hide, but this one, it's like she was born for it." Natasha nodded, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp, locked on the shifting data in front of her. She's not just skilled, she's a shapeshifter. That makes finding her almost impossible unless she wants to be found." Naruto leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, thinking through what little they did know. "So if we can't spot her face, we trace her habits. People like her don't just vanish, they stay close to where the power and the money are." Natasha's lips curved into the faintest smirk. "Exactly, and that's what led me here." She tapped the screen, pulling up an image of a sleek, expensive-looking hotel tucked into one of Paris's wealthiest districts. Shields flagged this place before, high class, no questions asked. A perfect safe house for someone like Mystique, especially if she's running jobs on the side. Naruto's gaze lingered on the photo, the sharpness in his eyes showing his mind was already racing through possibilities. So we walk in, hope she shows. More than hope, Natasha corrected. The only way to get in close is to fit the profile. The hotel's a known hub for black market trades, silent partnerships, and off-the-record arrangements. Everyone inside plays the part, and no one asks questions. The easiest cover for us? She glanced over at him, her tone light but steady. A couple. Naruto blinked once, raising an eyebrow as if the idea had just settled in. Heh, guess that makes sense. There was no awkwardness in the way the words hung between them, just an unspoken understanding of the mission, the roles, the mask they'd have to wear. For a moment, the sound of the engines filled the space between their thoughts. Guess I've worn stranger disguises, Naruto added after a second, offering her a relaxed grin. Natasha's lips twitched into something close to a real smile. You'll manage. Her voice was a little softer now, and for a brief moment, the usual weight she carried seemed to lift. Both of them knew the job came first. But in the quiet hum of the Quinjet, it felt like the mask was already slipping, just a little. All right, Naruto said, stretching out his arms and settling back. Let's see how convincing we can be. Natasha turned her gaze back to the screen, pulling up the hotel's guest list and security schematics. We'll need to be. Places like this, one wrong step, and you're either a guest or a ghost. The jet tilted slightly as it began to descend toward the city, the mission starting to take shape, and the line between role-playing and reality already beginning to blur. The Paris skyline stretched beneath them, the Quinjet gliding low now, hidden in the shadow of the clouds. By the time they touched down on the outskirts of the city, the plan was already locked between them, quiet, sharp, simple. By nightfall, they stood side by side on the polished marble steps of the hotel. Gone were their usual clothes, traded for a sharp, tailored suit on Naruto, black with subtle dark blue stitching, and a sleek, elegant dress on Natasha, her red hair pinned neatly back, her every movement calm and precise. Neither looked like themselves, that was the point. The hotel was the kind of place where names didn't matter as long as you looked like you belonged. It was a polished world of whispered deals and silent transactions, and the two of them fit in without raising a single brow. The concierge gave them the usual pleasantries, but it was clear, this place didn't ask too many questions. Are we on the list? Naruto murmured the question under his breath once they stepped into the elevator, watching the polished gold doors glide shut. Natasha's reply was just as quiet, her lips barely moving. They don't care about lists here. As long as you flash the right card, or the right mask, they'll roll out the red carpet. Naruto glanced down at the simple hotel keycard in his hand, twirling it once between his fingers. A world built on masks, starting to feel like home. She gave him a side glance, the faintest trace of a smirk playing on her lips, before the doors opened. Their room matched the rest of the place, modern, minimal, but expensive. The kind of room designed for people who didn't intend to stay long or leave a trace. Naruto moved toward the window, glancing out over the streets below, while Natasha unpacked the bare essentials, burner phones, a small concealed weapon, and a tablet already loaded with surveillance scans. It wasn't paranoia, it was routine. Any luck figuring out who she might be disguised as? Naruto asked, keeping his voice low, his eyes still on the view. Not yet. Natasha sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the files. She's smart, if Mystique's here, she'll blend in so well the cameras won't even blink at her. Our best shot is to play the part until she shows herself. Naruto turned, leaning against the window frame with his arms crossed, his expression thoughtful but relaxed. So, act natural. Natasha let out a short, dry chuckle. Natural for a couple staying in a place like this, think you can handle that? He raised an eyebrow, flashing her a lopsided grin. Please, this is the easiest undercover mission I've ever had. Her smirk lingered for just a second longer before her eyes drifted back to the screen, her voice lowering again, more serious now. This place is crawling with more than just Mystique's scent. S.H.I.E.L.D. flagged it for a reason. Black market deals, trafficking, people who don't walk out the same door they came in. Naruto's smile faded at the edges. The room, for all its comfort, felt a little colder. Guess we're in the right place, he said, pushing off the window and walking over to stand beside her, eyes scanning the tablet. Now we just have to wait for her to show. And so the first night began, two people wrapped in the thin veil of a role, waiting for a ghost in a city full of shadows. The hours passed slow but steady, the city outside moving on with its usual rhythm, but inside the hotel, everything was about observation. Subtle movements, quiet glances, keeping the mask in place. They'd blended in perfectly. Dinner in the Grand Lounge came first, both of them knowing it wasn't about eating, it was about being seen. Couples dotted the room, each table dressed in quiet elegance and candlelight. Naruto played the part with surprising ease, leaning back in his seat, smiling just enough when he spoke to her, his voice low but casual. Natasha matched the energy without missing a beat, fingers wrapping around the stem of her glass as if this was something they did all the time. To any stranger, they looked comfortable, too comfortable for two people on a mission. Under the table, Naruto's hand rested close to his lap, his other brushing the cufflink on his suit, a small, hidden trigger for the communicator in his ear. Ready to alert Natasha if he caught anything off. But for now, there was nothing. Almost feels like a date, he muttered under his breath, voice light and teasing, not taking his eyes off the people near the bar. Natasha sipped her drink, not looking at him. Don't get too used to it. But there was no edge to her voice this time. If anything, the statement sounded softer than expected. The night stretched on, their roles becoming second nature. Small touches when they passed each other in the hall. Whispered conversations near the elevators. Sitting too close in the lounge, leaning in as if sharing secrets. It wasn't part of the mission to actually enjoy the quiet between them, but it was happening anyway. Later, back in their room, Naruto tossed his suit jacket onto the chair, his tie hanging loose around his neck. Natasha moved to the window, arms folded, her expression distant but thoughtful as she watched the Paris skyline. Starting to think you might have done this before, Naruto joked lightly, breaking the silence. She looked back over her shoulder at him, one eyebrow raised. I'm trained to play any part. Sure, he nodded, walking over to stand beside her. But you're more comfortable than you want to admit. For a moment, there wasn't an answer. Just the city lights reflecting in the glass, and the comfortable, quiet space that had built up between them all day. The mission wasn't over. Mystique was still out there, hidden in plain sight. But here, for once, neither of them had to pretend too hard. The line between the act and reality was getting just a little more blurred. And neither of them seemed to mind. The soft echo of music drifted from the grand hall, notes from the live string quartet spilling out into the marble corridors. Guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses gathered on the polished floor, each step part of a practiced rhythm, a dance designed for appearances. Naruto and Natasha stood near the edge of the crowd, blending in like they belonged, but both were sharp-eyed beneath the calm exterior. When the invitation to dance reached them, a polite announcement from the hotel staff, Naruto glanced sideways at Natasha. A small, playful smirk tugging at his mouth. Well, he muttered under his breath, if we're going to sell the part, might as well commit, right? Natasha gave the faintest of sighs, though there wasn't any real protest in it. you better not step on my toes. Naruto offered his hand, and she took it, her grip steady, natural. As they moved onto the floor, the world seemed to slow, the sharp tension of the mission momentarily slipping into something more easy, something neither of them had expected. Their steps were smooth, unspoken coordination guiding them through the waltz. Naruto glanced at her, reading the way her walls were slightly lower here, in this moment, under the low golden lights and the soft sway of the music. It was almost easy to forget why they were here. Almost. Midway through the dance, Natasha's gaze flicked past his shoulder, just a flicker, but Naruto caught the shift immediately. Her fingers, ever so slightly, pressed against his hand in silent signal. He shifted without breaking stride, turning enough to follow her line of sight. There, standing off to the side near the balcony, was a woman. Dressed sharp, blending in perfectly, but her posture, it was wrong. Too poised, eyes too sharp, watching the room, not enjoying the night. Naruto's voice was low as he guided Natasha through another turn. You thinking what I'm thinking? Possibly Mystique, Natasha's voice barely moved. Soft against the music, but her eyes were locked. Or someone just as dangerous. They danced a little longer, keeping their cover, but the night had shifted. The game had finally begun. The two of them moved with easy, practiced steps, their bodies flowing with the music, but their minds sharp and locked on the target. Naruto kept his gaze soft, almost lazy, as his focus drifted back toward the woman by the balcony. When looking back to Natasha, he could see her motion to his eyes, which he guessed could only mean one thing. You want me to use my eyes, he muttered under his breath, keeping the rhythm. It's not that simple. What I used to see the cave under Mutant Island was chakra. People don't have it, thus I can't see them, aside from me that is. Also, even she did. It's not like I've met her before, so I wouldn't be able to tell her apart from anyone else. I am working on a bypass to this weakness though. Natasha's fingers flexed slightly against his hand, not enough to draw attention, but enough for him to feel the shift. It was worth asking, she murmured, voice just as smooth as the dance. But I figured, she's good at this. They glided through another turn, both locked in the unspoken trust they'd been building since the start of these missions. The closeness didn't feel awkward, didn't feel forced, not anymore. It felt easy. Their eyes met for a brief moment between steps. Neither of them said it, but the silent understanding hung there, clear as day. If it's her, we can't spook her, Natasha said, her voice lower now. Too many eyes, too many ways it can go wrong, we'll have to wait, catch her alone. Naruto's lips tugged into a faint grin. Guess we're both getting good at this whole, subtle thing. Surprising, considering who I'm working with, she teased softly, and though her tone was dry as ever, there was no sharpness behind it. Just familiarity. They danced on, the target still leaning at the balcony's edge, unaware of the plan forming just a few steps away. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like they were just partners on a mission. There was more weight in the silence between them, more comfort in the closeness. Not something either would say out loud, not yet, but it lingered there all the same. The music in the ballroom continued to drift around them, soft and elegant, blending perfectly with the gentle clinking of wine glasses and the low hum of idle conversation. But in the corner, away from the polished crowds and the gilded chandeliers, Naruto and Natasha stood in quiet focus, their bodies still lingering in the loose rhythm of the dance as they faced the woman by the balcony. The woman didn't turn to them right away. She sipped from her glass, eyes cast out over the glittering Paris skyline as though they hadn't been tracking her for the better part of the night. But finally, as though indulging them, she glanced back over her shoulder with the faintest curl of a knowing smile. You've been shadowing me since you stepped into this hotel, she mused, her voice smooth and sharp as glass. I almost thought you'd ask me for a dance instead. Natasha's lips twitched into something between amusement and calculation. We prefer to talk business on solid ground. The woman's eyes glinted at that, and before another word could be spoken, her form rippled, skin fading from human tones to unmistakable blue, shifting seamlessly into the sharp, poised figure of Mystique. Her golden eyes settled on them like a cat studying a pair of cornered birds. "So, the game's over, what do you want?" Naruto stepped forward slightly, his posture still relaxed, but his voice edged with quiet sincerity. "You're on a list, people like you, mutants a group is targeting. We've been finding them first, giving them a place to breathe, away from all of this." Natasha folded her arms, adding coolly, "And before you ask, no strings, just safety, for once." Mystique studied them, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the weight of the silence hung between them, thick and cautious. Naruto almost braced for another fight, another long-winded argument, another chase across rooftops or through dark streets. But instead, Mystique gave a quiet, thoughtful hum. She tilted her head, her smile returning, softer this time, almost like it was meant for herself. "All right, I'll come." The ease of her answer caught both of them slightly off guard. Naruto blinked once, glancing toward Natasha, who arched a brow, clearly just as thrown by the lack of resistance. "That easy?" Naruto asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Mystique's lips curved, a low, knowing laugh escaping her throat. "You expected me to make it difficult, didn't you? Not everything needs to end in a fight." "Besides," she added, brushing invisible dust off her jacket, "I've been waiting for the right way off the grid. You just saved me the trouble." Naruto and Natasha exchanged another brief glance, both silently agreeing not to push it further. A win was a win, and this mission, after everything, had gone unusually smooth. They turned away together, walking back toward the grand hallway, leaving Mystique trailing just behind them, her heels clicking lightly against the marble floor. For all her easygoing acceptance, there was something unreadable lingering in her golden gaze. And once their backs were fully turned, her hand drifted up casually to her ear, fingers brushing against the small comm device hidden beneath her hair. She pressed it once, voice dropping to a level so low it barely carried past her lips. "Infiltration of the mutant island has begun." A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face as her eyes flicked once more toward Naruto and Natasha, their trust unknowingly placed in the wrong hands. They finally did it. That thought sat heavy in Naruto's head as he stood alone in the slow-moving elevator, the soft hum of its ascent barely reaching his ears. For the first time in weeks, there was no immediate mission, no sudden ambush or wild lead to chase. The mutants were gathered, sheltered on his island, sealed away from the Brotherhood's reach behind barriers only he could break. It should have felt like a victory. But instead, something stirred deep in his chest. A faint, gnawing edge, like an itch at the back of his mind he couldn't scratch away. The kind of instinct you don't learn in any book or briefing, the kind that came from years of surviving worse odds than this. This should have been enough. But the unease refused to fade, lingering like a shadow behind every thought. His fists relaxed and clenched again at his sides, his reflection in the brushed steel doors staring back at him, unreadable. Should he have left this alone? Maybe, but maybe not. Regret had never been his way. Right or wrong, he'd chosen this path, bringing them together, offering them something better. He wasn't about to turn his back on that now, no matter how heavy this feeling pressed on his chest. The soft ding of the elevator doors broke his thoughts. As they slid open, the cool air of the hallway met his skin, and his focus sharpened. One step at a time. If the Brotherhood was moving, they wouldn't wait long. The next step was simple: gather the others, prepare. If this feeling was anything to go off of, it was for him to make the first move, before the Brotherhood did their next. One final fight, one clear shot to end it. His gaze drifted toward the window at the end of the hall, out to the horizon beyond his island. The wind shifted slightly, brushing against the glass like a quiet warning. It's coming. And he'd be ready. The door creaked open as Naruto stepped into the meeting room. Dim light filtered in through the tall windows, the ocean view stretching endlessly behind them, calm, steady, unaware of the storm creeping closer. His eyes drifted around the space, the long oval table, the neat chairs. No matter the setting, a meeting room always felt the same to him, cold, stiff, unnatural. Man, I've always hated these places. The thought pulled a smirk from the corner of his mouth, though the feeling behind it wasn't all humor. A flicker of memory sparked, a certain blonde from his old world, the one who always had a way of dragging him into meetings, even when he'd rather be anywhere else. Tsunade. For a brief second, the weight of the past pressed into his chest, but it faded as quickly as it came when the voices around him stirred. The room wasn't empty anymore. One by one, they'd taken their seats. Natasha sat closest, next to Laura, X-23, the two sharing a quiet glance between them before Natasha stood, moving casually to Naruto's side, her posture relaxed but her expression sharp, reading the room even as he held the floor. Storm sat further down, her arms crossed, expression as closed off as the skies before a thunderstorm. Darwin leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his poker face unreadable but his silence speaking enough. Mystique, of course, sat poised and cool, feigning her own brand of outrage like an actress hitting her mark. Naruto, for all the tension hanging around the room, kept his voice easy, playful, almost, but beneath the relaxed grin was something ironclad and steady. No dancing around it. He rested both hands on the table, knuckles light against the polished wood. I want you to help me fight. Simple, direct, no room for misunderstanding. The silence that followed wasn't shock, not really. It was the weight of resistance, the kind that sat in the air before voices started to rise. Storm was the first to speak, her voice smooth but cold. We came here for shelter. Not a war. Darwin nodded slightly, his gaze flicking toward the window. Fighting isn't surviving, I've had enough battles for one life. Mystique leaned back in her seat, letting out a sharp exhale through her nose. So that's your plan, use us as soldiers. The words had all the bite of genuine outrage, but Naruto's eyes flicked toward her for just a second, catching something. A fraction too rehearsed. A little too clean. The mask cracked, even if just for a blink, before she fixed it back in place. But Naruto let it slide, for now. His expression didn't shift. His tone didn't waver. I'm not forcing anyone. His gaze moved from face to face, but the Brotherhood isn't gonna stop because we ask them nicely. You can hide, you can run, you can stay here behind the seals I built, and yeah, you might be safe for a while. He straightened, folding his arms now, the playful edge gone. But sooner or later they'll come, and when they do, I'd rather meet them standing. The room sat quiet again, the weight of his words settling. Natasha, still at his side, glanced his way. There was no judgment in her look, only quiet understanding. She could feel it too. The storm was coming. And even with the mutants right here in the room, it felt like they were already surrounded. The door to the meeting room let out a quiet hiss as it slid shut behind Naruto, locking him inside with his own thoughts for a moment longer before the conversation began. His eyes scanned the space. A round table sat at the center, cold and polished, surrounded by familiar faces. Natasha stood beside her chair, arms crossed but relaxed, the kind of stance she only took when she was trying to seem more at ease than she really was. X-23, seated with her boots lightly tapped against the leg of her chair, looked as guarded as ever, her sharp gaze flicking around the room, assessing. Storm sat with her hands folded, graceful but stern, her expression unreadable. Darwin leaned back, head tilted as though studying the ceiling rather than the people in the room, but Naruto knew better. He was always calculating. And finally Mystique, who sat poised. Chin resting against her knuckles, her body perfectly still but her golden eyes quietly scanning the room like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Naruto drew in a slow breath, placing his hands on the table, his voice breaking the silence without any hesitation. I want you to help me fight. There was no room for misunderstanding in his tone, no clever build-up, no attempt to ease into it. He'd said it plain. The air around the table shifted the moment the words dropped. For a while, no one answered, only the quiet hum of the island systems beneath the floor. Darwin was the first to move, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. His usually easygoing expression had vanished, replaced by something heavier, more serious. Fight, he echoed, like the word itself was still settling into his mind. You're not talking about self-defense, are you? Naruto didn't flinch. No, Darwin's brow furrowed, his fingers tapping against the table once, slow and thoughtful. I didn't come here to pick more fights, Naruto, I came here to get away from them. His voice wasn't angry, but the weight behind it was clear. You know what they've done to mutants like me, to people who can't blend in. You know why some of us hide. Naruto nodded once, slow and understanding, before lifting his eyes to meet Darwin's fully. I do know, I've been protecting this place because of people like you. But hiding isn't going to save us when the Brotherhood decides to burn everything to the ground. A heavy silence followed, the kind that wrapped around the room like a second skin. Then Storm stirred, her fingers slowly uncurling from each other. You speak as if war is inevitable, she said quietly, her voice calm but carrying the full force of a thunderstorm barely contained beneath the surface. I thought the goal was peace, Naruto. His gaze flicked to her, it still is, but peace isn't something the Brotherhood's interested in. If we don't push back, there won't be a world left to negotiate for. Storm studied him for a long moment. Her expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. You expect us to leave the safety you offered, to become soldiers? Naruto's eyes didn't waver. No, I expect you to fight for your future, the same way I've always fought for mine. A sharp voice cut through the room then, X-23, who'd been silent until now. If you're waiting for me to object, she said, her voice low but unwavering, don't. I've fought enough to know running only delays the fight. She leaned back slightly, arms folding over her chest. If the Brotherhood's coming, better we hit them first. Her bluntness hung in the air, a contrast to the hesitations of the others. Naruto gave her a quiet nod of appreciation. But the last voice to rise was the one he'd been waiting for. Mystique. She exhaled softly, leaning back in her chair, arms folding lazily as if the weight of the conversation barely touched her. And what makes you so sure this is the only way, she asked, her tone sharp, layered with just enough false outrage to pass for sincerity to anyone who didn't know better. Naruto's gaze lingered on her a second longer, because I've seen what happens when people wait too long. Mystique tilted her head, the corner of her mouth twitching into what looked like a frown, but Naruto caught the faintest flicker of calculation behind her expression. A shift too subtle for most eyes, but his weren't most eyes. You expect us to risk everything, just because you say the Brotherhood will strike, she pressed, her voice edged with challenge. Naruto's voice dropped lower, the playfulness gone, leaving only cold honesty behind. I'm not asking you to believe me. He paused. I'm asking you to survive. The room fell quiet again, and even as Storm's gaze softened, even as Darwin leaned back, lost in thought, Naruto kept his focus on Mystique. There was something in the way she responded that told him everything he needed to know, the slight delay in her words, the way her outrage didn't quite match her body language. He didn't need her to confess. Not yet. Natasha, who had remained mostly quiet, finally stood and moved to his side, her shoulder brushing his lightly, a quiet but clear sign of support. Their eyes met briefly, and he could see it in hers too. She felt it. Something wasn't right. And the game wasn't over yet. The silence after Naruto's last words hung in the air, lingering over the table like an unspoken weight. One by one, the doubt that had clouded the room began to shift. Slowly but surely, the mutants around him straightened, finding resolve in the space where hesitation had sat only moments before. Darwin was the first to nod, fingers finally stopping their rhythmic tap against the table. "You're right," he muttered, the words dragging out of him like a reluctant truth. "Hiding won't save us, so I'll fight." Storm followed, her gaze steady but holding a trace of sadness beneath the iron. "If the storm is inevitable, then I'd rather stand in front of it than let it sweep away everything." X-23 didn't even bother to add anything new, her earlier agreement already standing firm. She gave Naruto the smallest of nods, her arms still crossed, but her posture was different now, ready, committed. One by one, they aligned. The beginnings of a team. The shape of hope, even if the odds were stacked against them. But then, Mystique shifted. Her voice came soft at first, almost conversational, her expression still that perfectly sculpted mask of poise. But the curve of her mouth betrayed something else, something darker. A smile. "I can't help but wonder, Naruto," she began, her voice smooth as silk but carrying an undertone that made the air feel sharper. "It's all well and good that you've got your little army willing to fight." Her eyes slid lazily toward him, locking on, sharp and cold. "But tell me, what's your plan, exactly? You've gathered us all here, safe behind your fancy seals and those eyes of yours, but you haven't searched for the Brotherhood. You haven't tracked them, haven't even tried to locate their base." She let the words hang, watching them land. Watching him. "So what exactly is the plan, Naruto?" She asked again, her smile deepening. "Charge out there blind and hope for the best? Or maybe you're planning to just sit here and wait for them to come to you?" Naruto's expression barely shifted, but his silence was all the confirmation Mystique needed to press further. Her voice lowered, turning almost conspiratorial, like she was letting him in on a secret, or leading him into a trap. "And that seal of yours," she went on, glancing casually toward the others at the table. "That clever little barrier you set up around this island. So impressive, it only lets in those whose DNA you've registered, right?" Her fingers drummed against the table, slow and deliberate. "You registered mine. Didn't you?" The question was a trap, plain and simple, but she spoke it with the same ease as someone making small talk over coffee. The others began to glance between them now, the unease in the room building like static. She tilted her head, studying him as if she already knew the answer, but wanted to watch the realization settle into his bones. "Tell me something, Naruto," her voice softened even more, her smile stretching just a little wider, wide enough to feel unnatural now. "What if the Brotherhood already had my DNA before I ever set foot on this island?" The room seemed to still, the weight of those words crashing down on them all at once. "You've been so sure we were safe," Mystique whispered, her voice almost mockingly gentle. "But safety is such a fragile illusion, isn't it?" Naruto's hands, still resting lightly on the table, curled into slow, silent fists. The uneasy look in Natasha's eyes said it all, she'd heard it too. The false calm in Mystique's voice. The veiled taunt hidden beneath her smile. And for the first time since this meeting had started, Naruto felt the growing certainty that they weren't planning for the battle. The battle had already started. The room felt like it dropped a few degrees, the weight of Mystique's words still hanging sharp in the air. Naruto's jaw tightened, his thoughts racing, gears turning behind his eyes as the others shifted uncomfortably. starting to understand the true meaning behind her smile. And then, a low, steady hum vibrated in his ears. Faint at first, almost easy to dismiss, but growing. Deep, mechanical, out of place in the stillness. Naruto's sharp instincts locked onto it. His head slowly turned toward the window behind him, pupils tightening. That sound, he knew it. A helicopter. But it wasn't just any helicopter. His mind had barely formed the thought before the sharp whistle of compressed air split the silence. A blinding ball of blue-white energy surged through the window, the glass shattering into a rain of jagged shards. Time seemed to slow, just long enough for Naruto's eyes to widen, and then the blast struck him dead on, sending him hurtling backward. The force carried him straight across the room, through the opposite window, smashing the reinforced glass like it was paper, and into the open air. The world spun wildly around him. The blast kept pushing, like a hand refusing to let him fall, until the energy finally burned out. His body arced through the sky, still trailing smoke, before crashing hard into the rocky edge of the island's outer cliffs. The impact rattled his bones. Pain flared sharp through his limbs, knocking the air from his lungs as he tumbled to a broken stop, half buried in rock and dirt. His ears rang. His mind struggled to catch up, thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. They were already here. That was all he could think, even as the pain sharpened, as his vision blurred and refocused against the clouded sky. The Brotherhood didn't wait. They struck first. The sky above him swirled with gray clouds and the sharp scent of smoke. Naruto gritted his teeth, wincing as his body protested every movement, his muscles locking from the lingering heat of the blast. But through the haze, his eyes lifted, and the sight above crushed the air from his chest. His island, his home, the place he had spent years turning into a safe haven, a place for people like him, for people who had no one else. Now it was burning. From the cliffs, Naruto could see dark shapes darting through the skies, attack helicopters circling overhead. Like vultures waiting for a carcass to stop twitching. Bright streaks of gunfire and mutant energy bolts lit up the air like a warzone, cutting through trees and carving into stone. Buildings, ones he had helped build by hand, were crumbling under the weight of the assault. Black smoke curled from the training grounds, and even the quiet corners of the island where the mutants had once found peace were now alive with gunfire and chaos. The Brotherhood hadn't just found them. They were dismantling everything. His fists twitched, dirt falling from his scraped knuckles as his mind battled to focus, heart pounding with anger and dread. I should have seen it. He forced his hands down. Trying to push himself upright, chakra gathering at his core, ready to flood his limbs with power, to stand and fight, but it wasn't fast enough. The pain finally caught up to him, and his vision blinked white, the gathering chakra flickering out like a dying ember. And then everything went dark. The blast had left the meeting hall unrecognizable, shattered walls, overturned chairs, the round table now cracked straight through its center. Smoke still drifted through the broken windows, the distant hum of rotor blades echoing through the gaps like a death bell. Natasha stood there, still, heart hammering against her ribs as her mind raced to process what had just happened. Naruto was gone, blasted clean through the building. Her gaze, sharp as ever, snapped to Mystique, and so did everyone else's. The shapeshifter stood there with an unsettling calm, her expression unreadable save for the faintest hint of satisfaction pulling at the corners of her mouth. The kind of look Natasha had seen before, one that never came from an ally. A dozen thoughts rained through Natasha's head, sharp and scattered like broken glass. Of course she played us, of course she was waiting, and now Naruto was down, but hopefully not out for good. Storm's fist started to spark, Laura's claws twitched at her sides, and Darwin shifted slightly, ready to evolve the second something moved, but before anyone could so much as flinch toward Mystique. The deep metallic thud of boots cut through the silence. The Brotherhood strike team was already filtering into the ruined hall. First through the broken doors, then from the other side of the helicopter hole, black-clad figures moved in military precision, their weapons not aimed, but lowered, as if they already knew the room had been won. Like they were herding the last survivors into place rather than fighting them. Mystique's voice broke the tension, low and smooth. "You didn't think I came alone, did you?" Natasha's jaw tightened, her mind locking back into focus. The moment for shock was over. Now came the part she was trained for, survival. "They're cornering us." Her fingers flexed slightly, ready to draw her weapon, her gaze flicking to the others, but we're not done yet. The moment the Brotherhood strike team fanned out across the ruined meeting hall, Natasha didn't hesitate. Training kicked in, instincts overriding the lingering shock. "Now," she barked, her voice cutting sharp through the smoke. Storm was the first to move, raising her hands as the crackle of raw electricity surged through the air, the pressure dropping as clouds began to gather unnaturally fast above the open roof. Lightning split the sky and, a moment later, slammed through the broken ceiling, arcing toward the first wave of attackers. The blast sent 3 of them flying, their equipment fried before they even had a chance to return fire. Darwin adapted in a flash, his skin hardening, bones reinforcing as the Brotherhood mutants targeted him with wild energy blasts. Every hit ricocheted off his armored body like pebbles off steel, his expression calm, controlled, but his eyes burned with quiet determination. X-23 moved next, fast and precise. Her claws flashed out with that same deadly ease, slipping between 2 of the strike team before they even realized she'd closed the distance. Her hits weren't meant to kill, not yet, but her strikes were surgical, enough to disable their weapons and leave them unconscious on the floor. And Natasha? She was everywhere at once, ducking low beneath a blast, rolling behind an overturned chair, and vaulting forward with her batons crackling with electric charge. She struck fast and hard, every blow meant to disable. Mystique, meanwhile, simply stood at the center of the chaos, untouched, that same cold smirk still playing on her lips. Watching the battle unfold like a spectator, as if the outcome was already set in stone. Natasha's breath was sharp and steady as she dropped another attacker, then spared a glance toward the shapeshifter. "You were stalling this whole time, weren't you?" she muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Mystique met her gaze across the room, tilting her head slightly, unbothered. "Did you want me to tell you, Natasha? You really should have trusted your instincts." Another explosion ripped through the far side of the building, the Brotherhood was tightening the noose. Their attack wasn't just brute force, it was strategic, coordinated. But Natasha wasn't about to give up the island, or the people she'd come to trust, without a fight. She locked eyes with Laura, both nodding silently. They might have been blindsided, but this battle wasn't over. The battle stretched on longer than Natasha wanted to admit. For every Brotherhood soldier they dropped, another 2 seemed to appear, moving with purpose. Not desperation. They weren't here to wipe them out. They were here for something else. And then the shift became clear. One by one, the mutants were cornered, subdued in split-second strikes that left barely enough time to react. Darwin, X-23, even with their skill and raw power, couldn't avoid it. Tiny mechanical darts, almost invisible to the eye, latching against skin, drawing just a pinprick of blood before ejecting away, their job done. Natasha caught sight of one midair, her stomach dropped. The Brotherhood wasn't fighting to win the island, like it might seem at first watch. They were fighting to secure the future of their next attack, to finish their plan, to get the DNA they needed to finish whatever weapon they were building. And at the center of it all, Mystique. She moved through the chaos like a ghost, unharmed, untouched, almost amused as the Brotherhood strike team completed their mission. As the last dart hit its mark, she stepped casually toward the still hovering helicopter outside the broken wall, the same cold, unbothered smirk on her face. Natasha, battered but still standing, caught sight of her just as Mystique turned back for one last look. "Thanks for the hospitality," Mystique said dryly, her voice echoing over the gunfire and fading thunder. "Tell Naruto when he wakes up, better luck next time." Natasha's fingers brushed against her belt, smooth, practiced, and in the split second before Mystique stepped onto the helicopter, she slipped a tiny black tracker from her glove and flicked it toward the landing strut. It latched on silently, magnetic and unnoticed. The helicopter engines roared as the Brotherhood lifted away, carrying Mystique and the samples into the dark sky. Natasha stood there, chest rising and falling, hands curled into fists. The pain of failure pulled at her, but the tracker's soft green light blinked against the night. Darkness. That's all there was at first. Heavy, endless black pressing in on him from every side. Naruto exhaled slowly through his nose, his head tilting back against an invisible wall as his mind caught up with reality. Of course. His thoughts were dry. Lacking even the strength to be annoyed. Just one thing after another, he muttered into the void. As his senses adjusted, the scenery around him shifted, the familiar, caged-off seal of his mindscape, etched in ancient patterns that glowed dimly against the dark floor. The air felt cold, heavy, unnaturally quiet. This wasn't some random unconscious dream, this was the seal. And there, looming at the center of it all, was the 10 Tails. The creature's colossal frame was both monstrous and otherworldly, a twisted mass of tails and muscle wrapped around a single cyclopean eye, glaring like a moon in the dark. Its body pulsed with restrained power, the very air around it rippling from its presence. A nightmarish blend of primal beast and raw, living chakra. Naruto stood there, hands buried in his pockets, staring up at it. His face was blank, more tired than fearful. One thing after another, the thought repeated, a little sharper this time. How many times, he said aloud, do my adventures just have to blow up in my face? His gaze wandered, not even focusing on the 10 Tails anymore, as his mind drifted back over the years. When I first graduated the academy, I was tricked by that bastard Mizuki, a humorless snort left him. My first real mission was supposed to be a C rank, turned out to be at least A, still didn't get the extra pay for that, by the way. His jaw clenched slightly, voice quieter now, laced with something between reflection and old frustration. I'm not even gonna get started on the Chunin exams, or Pain's attack, or the Fourth Great Shinobi War. His hand flexed a little at his side, everything between those was just sprinkles on the ice cream. His gaze finally lifted back to the enormous eye of the 10 Tails, watching its silent, unblinking stare. And now here I am, standing in front of the very beast that tore my home away from me. He let the words sit for a moment, heavy and bitter. Why now, of all times? His voice lowered, almost a mutter, more to himself than the beast. It's not like I was ever summoned here before. Not like anything can summon me here. His eyes narrowed slightly. You're just a mindless monster. But even as he said it, a flicker of unease slid beneath his calm, something about this wasn't adding up. The 10 Tails' massive eye stared down at him, unblinking, unfeeling, a towering beast of living nightmare and raw destruction. Yet, for all its size, it didn't move. It just sat there. Naruto's frown deepened, his hands still resting lazily in his pockets, but his mind was starting to catch up to the detail his instincts had already flagged. That's odd. The last time he'd stood here like this, the last time he'd faced the beast sealed inside him, the result had been simple, violence. Without hesitation. No games, no waiting. The 10 Tails had always lunged for him the second it felt his presence, raw hate and primal instinct wrapped into one. But now, nothing. Just that single, enormous eye watching him. No snarl. No attack. No crushing weight of its tails coming down on him like before. Naruto's head tilted slightly, as if studying the beast from a new angle, suspicion sharpening the fatigue from his voice. "You're awfully quiet today," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. He let the silence linger between them, watching for even the smallest twitch, any signal of intent. But the 10 tails remained as still as a stone, its hulking form unmoving, coiled around itself like a titan locked in thought. Naruto exhaled slowly through his nose, his tone growing more serious, quieter. "Our first few meetings, you didn't waste a second before trying to rip me apart. Even after I sealed you, the second I slipped, you lunged for the kill." His gaze locked firmly onto that giant eye now, searching for any flicker of recognition, any crack in its monstrous calm. "But not today," he added under his breath, "no roaring, no thrashing, no attack, you're just sitting there." His hand finally left his pocket, fingers flexing slightly, muscles tense but restrained. "Which means you're either waiting for something," his expression flattened. "Or someone else already got your attention before I even woke up." The weight of that thought settled into his chest like stone. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. And if the 10 tails wasn't attacking, it likely meant something worse. The silence dragged for a moment longer, the 10 tails' eyes still locked on him. But then, the air shifted. A faint sound, like ink dripping into water, echoed through the void of his mindscape. From the base of the beast, a shapeless, pitch-black mass began to ripple and rise, forming a crude, shifting silhouette. It peeled away from the 10 tails' body like it had been part of its shadow all along. A voice followed, calm, dry, almost amused. "You should be thankful. If it weren't for me, Mother might have torn you to pieces the moment you arrived." Naruto's brow twitched. "Mother," he echoed under his breath. His body stayed loose, but his mind sharpened. The thing's voice didn't match any threat he knew, and the shape didn't fit any enemy from his past either. Squinting slightly, Naruto tilted his head, voice casual but edged with suspicion. "So, have you always been living in here, Mr. Shadow, or did you just move in?" The figure let out a dry, humorless chuckle before its form solidified a little more, like a living stain that never quite found a real shape. "Hidden in the shadows, I've gone by many names." The voice mused, almost as if savoring the words. "But the one I've grown most fond of, is Black Zetsu." Naruto's frown deepened, the name unfamiliar, but the tone and confidence it carried wasn't lost on him. "And to answer your question," Zetsu continued, his voice smooth and steady, "as long as the 10 tails has been sealed within you, I have been here. A quiet passenger, waiting." Naruto's mind ticked over that revelation, his lips pressing into a thin line. 5 years. 5 whole years. And he'd never once sensed this thing until now. A dozen questions crowded his thoughts. How old was this thing really? Why did it call the 10 tails mother? Why now, of all times? What did it mean about waiting? But in the end, he kept it simple: start small, root out the lies. "Alright, so why calm the 10 tails down now?" Naruto asked, his voice low and even. "If you've been living rent-free in this seal for 5 years, why only show up after that last hit?" Zetsu's answer was immediate. "Simple, the attack jolted you hard enough that your subconscious yanked you into the seal. That's the first time you've been this close to Mother's presence in a long while." The black mass shifted slightly, voice cool and almost amused. "I used the small window of time to search through your memories, just as I've done with others before you. But once I saw the state of the world, your world, I realized any hope of freeing her had long since died." Naruto's eyes narrowed at that. Escape, that single word stuck in his head more than anything else. So the beast, or at least this shadowy parasite, had plans once. Plans that apparently didn't matter anymore. Why give up on escape so soon? he asked, voice quieter, not entirely trusting what he was hearing. Because the only reason I would ever seek escape, Zetsu replied, voice dark but oddly calm, was to restore my mother, to return her to her true self. It let the silence sit for a beat, almost like it wanted the weight of those words to land. But the pieces needed for that are gone. Scattered, erased, lost. You left your world, where what I needed to help her existed. Naruto blinked slowly, taking it all in, his mind racing behind his poker face. And then, finally, the question that lingered the most slipped out. Why do you call the 10 Tails your mother? The black mass shifted again, this time with a note of pride in its voice. Because she is. And then Zetsu began to explain. Naruto stood there in silence, arms crossed loosely, as the story poured out, a history buried so deep it barely felt real. The 10 Tails wasn't born of nature, or the world. It was born of a woman. Kagaya Otsutsuki. A godlike being, who once consumed the fruit of the world's sacred tree and became the source of all chakra. It wasn't until her sons, Hagoromo and Hamura, opposed her that she was defeated, sealed away, and her body reshaped into the beast they now called the 10 Tails. Black Zetsu, however, was her will. A living shadow crafted to ensure her revival, manipulating wars, people, even time itself, all to set her free. And yet here he was, trapped inside the seal, with no way to finish the job. Naruto exhaled a long breath through his nose, almost as if he was trying to process the sheer scale of it. Of course, it's always something ridiculous, he muttered to himself. His gaze lifted to the motionless 10 Tails once more, the truth sinking in deeper than the beast's stare. Naruto stood there, gaze steady on the hulking mass of the 10 Tails. The thing hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched, and that silence was starting to feel more threatening than any roar it could have let out. Then came the voice again. Smooth, calm, like it wasn't bothered by the chaos waiting outside. Well, now you wake up. Naruto blinked, glancing sideways as the shapeless shadow slid lazily along the edges of the space. Black Zetsu's form rippled with eerie familiarity, like it belonged there all along. But not like you were before. The words made Naruto's brow twitch, and the shadow only deepened its almost playful tone. Like I said, I don't exactly have much purpose anymore. Mother won't be returning to her throne, not in this world. Not in this lifetime. So really, I have no trouble helping you through your little dilemma with her. Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly. He could feel it, the ever-present pressure the 10 Tails' existence kept on his mind, that constant strain. The same one that had robbed him of sleep for years. The same one that forced him to keep every ounce of will braced against the weight of her presence, or risk being swallowed whole. And Zetsu knew it. You've spent years forcing yourself awake, haven't you? Zetsu murmured, circling around the edge of his vision. Barely sleeping. Always keeping enough of your will anchored in this place so she couldn't break you apart in your weakest moments. Naruto stayed quiet. He didn't need to answer, the silence was enough. That won't be a problem anymore. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. From now on, there's no need to split your focus. No need to stretch your will thin. I'll keep her still for you, and as for her chakra. Zetsu's shadow seemed to curl with slow satisfaction. It'll be much easier to take, far easier than before. The 10 Tails let out a low rumble, but still, it did not move, docile, subdued. Naruto exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest starting to lift, replaced now with something unfamiliar, a strange, cold calm. Zetsu's voice lowered, just above a whisper now. So like I said. Now you wake up, better than you were before. And as the world around him started to fracture, Zetsu's voice followed him like a final shadow, let's see what you do now, shinobi. Naruto's eyes snapped open. A sharp inhale burned through his lungs as raw power flooded his body, more than he'd ever expected, more than he'd ever allowed himself to tap into. His muscles felt light, almost unbound, the bruises and cracks in his body gone as if they'd never existed. But the lingering weight in his chest wasn't physical. Black Zetsu, the name hung heavy in his mind, twisting around his thoughts like a splinter he couldn't pull free. The idea of something lurking in his head. For years, undetected, watching, learning, it was enough to make his skin crawl. But there wasn't time for that now. Letting out a slow, resigned sigh, Naruto pushed himself to his feet. His gaze drifted up toward the sky, the sounds of rotors still cutting through the air above. The battle wasn't over, not yet. And then, he moved. Faster than he'd ever felt in his life, faster than the searing golden burn of Kurama's cloak, faster than the fluid precision of Sage Mode. This wasn't speed learned through training. This was something new, an untapped rawness that coursed through his limbs as the Ten Tails chakra wove through his own. The world around him blurred, the wind never fast enough to keep pace with his momentum. The earth a barely registered flash beneath his feet. In seconds, the last line of Brotherhood helicopters hanging over the island was met with a force they couldn't see coming. Naruto cut through them like a living storm, a golden streak laced with dark, heavy undertones, disabling rotors, engines, and weapons with pinpoint strikes before their pilots even processed the threat. And before the debris even hit the water, he was gone, already standing back in the shattered meeting hall. The wind settled behind him. His chakra, still wild and surging beneath the surface, flickered faintly as he stood there, the weight of the moment catching up. The others hadn't seen it yet. But Naruto knew it deep down. Naruto stood still, his breath steady but his eyes heavy as the last traces of chakra flickered faintly off his skin. The moment the room registered his return, Natasha stepped forward, her face marked with dirt and strain but her voice as sharp as ever. "They're gone," she said quietly. "The Brotherhood got what they wanted. They took X-23's and Darwin's DNA and left." Naruto's head tilted slightly, his gaze turning to meet hers. There was a cold weight to her words, no point softening the blow, not here, not with him. For all the damage we managed to do, it wasn't enough. Naruto didn't reply at first. He turned away, walking slowly toward the shattered window. The sea wind cut through the broken frame, carrying the sharp scent of smoke and scorched earth. From here, the view stretched over the ruined half of the island. His island. What was once a sanctuary, a place built for people like him, for mutants to be safe, to belong, was now scarred and crumbling under black smoke. Fires still crackled in the distance, the ground was torn apart, and deep within the ruins his seals, the ones he'd trusted to keep them safe, flickered weakly. His fists clenched at his sides. All it took was one oversight, one mole. His thoughts twisted and festered, boiling under the surface. The sharp bitterness of failure clawed at his chest. But beneath it, another truth sank in: this wasn't over. "They planned this," he muttered under his breath, his voice low but steady. "Every second of it. From the moment we stepped into that hotel, they were 10 steps ahead." He glanced back at Natasha, something hardened behind his gaze now. For a long moment, Natasha didn't say anything. She watched him, standing there, staring out at the broken island like the weight of every mistake was stitched into his chest. She could see it, clear as day. The tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw locked, the way his fingers flexed as if holding back the need to strike something. He was blaming himself. And she understood that feeling all too well. Quietly, she stepped closer, her voice softer now, cutting through the quiet chaos of the ruined room. "You did everything you could," she said, and her words were steady, not patronizing, just the truth as she saw it. "You couldn't have known Mystique would turn on us, no one could. Naruto didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the horizon, watching smoke rise over the tree line like some kind of cruel flag waving him down. He exhaled through his nose, sharp and short. I should have seen it, he muttered. The setup, the timing, when we found her it was too easy, all of it. I let them walk right into this place and tear it apart, I let them win. Natasha shook her head, stepping just close enough to nudge her shoulder against his arm, light but grounding. You didn't let them do anything, she said, voice firmer. They've been at this longer than we have. We were playing catch-up the second this mission started. You've carried this whole thing on your back, Naruto. The island, the team, the fight, all of it. Her gaze lifted to meet his, catching the smallest flicker of doubt behind his usual fire. You didn't lose today, you survived, we all did. That means you've still got time to fix this. For the first time since waking up, his expression shifted, only a little, but enough. His posture relaxed, the sharp edge of anger dulling as the guilt stopped tightening its hold on him. A small breath slipped out. More like a sigh than a reply, and his head dipped slightly. Yeah, he muttered. You're right. Natasha gave him a tiny, dry smirk, I usually am. That earned a faint chuckle from him, the first real one since the attack, and the silence between them wasn't as heavy as before. She let the moment settle before her voice softened again. We'll hit back, smarter, harder, together. Naruto's eyes lingered on the horizon one last time before turning back to her. Yeah, together. The low hum of the Quinjet's engines filled the space as the group sat strapped in, the tension lightened only slightly by the new air of determination hanging between them. Naruto sat near the front. Arms folded behind his head, that familiar playful smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. Despite the weight of the mission ahead, he couldn't help the relaxed posture, old habits were hard to kill. So, he started casually, glancing over the small squad, new suits, new target, same old odds stacked against us. Starting to feel like we're making a real habit out of impossible. Storm, X-23, and Darwin sat across from him, all fitted in sleek black gear, matching the aesthetic of both spy and shinobi, blending into the kind of world Natasha had been born into, and Naruto had adapted to. The three looked sharper now, ready, focused. Natasha stood near the display screen. Arms crossed, her expression as professional and sharp as ever. The moment his voice died down, she keyed up the digital map, bringing up a rough satellite image of the old warehouse they'd tracked. I was able to plant a tracker, she started, calm and to the point. One of the Brotherhood's helicopters. It held long enough for us to map out their base of operations, a simple warehouse on the surface, but I don't buy the simple part. She tapped through another layer of scans. From the layout, the place is rigged, likely a lab, or worse. The surrounding area is set up with multiple campsites, we estimate dozens at first, but after cross-referencing their movements and the numbers we saw in the last attack, it's safe to assume they have hundreds. Possibly more, all mutants, all trained. The group absorbed the weight of that. Storm leaned in slightly, her gaze cold but steady. So this isn't just some clean extraction, she muttered. It's war. Pretty much, Natasha agreed. Naruto stretched his arms out over the back of his seat, eyes flicking toward the map thoughtfully. So the old, kick the front door in and wreck the place, plan's off the table. Unless you want to get gunned down before you take 3 steps, Natasha added dryly. A beat of silence passed between them before the group started pitching ideas, ways to divide the enemy, lure the mutants away, strike at the lab from behind. Every plan circled back to the same core strategy, misdirection. In the end, the answer was simple. Dangerous, but simple. Storm leaned forward, voice low but certain. We'll hold the army, the four of us can draw as much attention as it takes. X-23 nodded, flexing her gloved hands like she was already itching for the fight. Keep them busy, long enough for you to find the lab. Darwin added with his usual dry wit, and whoever's dumb enough to be running this circus, you'll handle them, right? Naruto shifted slightly, the playful smirk fading as his usual seriousness cut through. That's the plan. Naruto had one last thought on his mind, before he was glad and happy to see that this team wanted to help. Happy they choose this route to stop the Brotherhood. But after seeing what happened to his island, his views changed just a bit. The moment stretched, and before the team could settle into that quiet confidence, Naruto raised his voice once more, cutting through the space. Last chance, he said, looking at each of them. You're sure about this? You know I could do this alone. It'd take longer, yeah, but I could still end it. I don't want you risking yourselves just because you feel like you have to. For a second, the group was silent, until Darwin huffed out a half-laugh. With all due respect, you'd take so long doing it solo you'd probably trip over your own ego and die of boredom. Naruto barked out a short laugh at that, shaking his head. You know I can't die that easy, he said under his breath, the humor laced with a rare thread of truth only he understood. The moment broke, and as the others drifted into conversation, running through their gear checks and minor talk, Naruto's gaze drifted to the side, landing on Natasha. She was seated on the bench across from him, arms resting loosely on her knees. The sharp focus in her eyes softened when she noticed his stare, and he gave her a curious glance. I forgot to ask you the same thing, he said quietly. Your mission was supposed to be over once we found these guys. You don't have to stay. Natasha held his gaze. Face unreadable at first. The cold, calculated mask she wore so well stayed in place for another beat. Before a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Fury never gave me a definitive end date for this mission, she replied smoothly. No orders on what to do once we found the Brotherhood. That means how this mission ends, is up to me. Naruto blinked once, surprised at the openness behind the statement. But before he could speak, she stood up, stepping just close enough that her voice dropped to something more personal. Even if I believed you could finish this alone, she continued, I wouldn't let you. Her eyes narrowed slightly, voice softer, but firm. You're not alone. And you're not going to fight solo, not this time. There was a pause, the kind that weighed heavier than silence, before her lips quirked with dry humor. Besides, I did help with half the work finding the people who could save the world. If I let you handle the rest, you'd take all the glory. Naruto huffed out another low laugh, shaking his head. Guess I would. They shared a quiet look, not needing to say much more. The Quinjet's engines roared a little louder as they pushed closer to the destination. The plan was set. The mission was clear. And this time, Naruto wasn't going in alone. The Quinjet cut low through the cloud cover, the moonlight breaking across its dark frame as the team finally laid eyes on the old warehouse. From above, the building looked exactly as Natasha's intel described, rusted metal, worn walls, empty of life on the outside. But the real activity was all around it. Dozens of tents were scattered in loose formation across the clearing, the canvas flapping under the cold night breeze. Campfires still glowed, embers crackling softly against the otherwise still night, illuminating silhouettes moving between the camps. Mutants, plenty of them. Even from the air, they could see them. Some were towering brutes, bodies mutated into hardened masses of stone or steel, others looked deceptively human, except for the unnatural glint in their eyes, or the way the shadows bent around them unnaturally. Some stretched unnervingly tall, arms longer than natural, fingers tipped like blades. Others hunched low, animal-like, ready to pounce. All of them waiting for something, and the noise of the Quinjet was their signal. The moment the side door slid open, Natasha, X-23, and Storm were the first to disembark, moving silently to cover. Without needing to be told, they split formation and picked off the sentries positioned on the warehouse's rooftop and the nearby tree lines, trained mutants and human mercenaries both, snipers lying in wait for the obvious approach. One by one, the silenced takedowns echoed through the night, short sharp thuds as targets crumpled to the earth. No gunmen left in the high ground. But the silence didn't last. The sudden lack of movement overhead didn't go unnoticed. Within minutes, the camp stirred, mutants emerging from their tents in groups, faces twisted in confusion that quickly sharpened into alert hostility. A wide range of powers already sparked to life, glowing eyes, sharpened claws, strange auras crackling against the air. One mutant with a cybernetic spine adjusted a scope attached directly to his eye, sweeping the area. The night's calm was officially broken. As the camp came alive, Naruto stood casually just at the tree line, twirling something small between his fingers. The faint glow of a soft, unfinished Rasengan pulsed in his palm like the heartbeat of a storm waiting to break. The army was fully awake now, mutants closing ranks across the clearing. Some were shifting the dirt beneath their feet with sheer force, others already creating barriers or forming attack lines. Naruto exhaled slowly, rolling his neck, the low glow of the Rasengan brightening in his hand. "All right," he muttered under his breath. "Showtime." And in the blink of an eye, he vanished, the ground cracking behind him as he launched forward, moving faster than even the mutants' enhanced eyes could track. A blue blur cut straight through the first line, sending bodies flying before anyone had time to react. The Rasengan slammed into one unfortunate mutant's chest, not even fully formed. And still sent the target careening into a group behind him, scattering them like bowling pins. Naruto didn't stop, his body was pure momentum, bouncing off the broken ground, weaving through attacks like the air itself bent away from him. Faster than he'd moved even in his KCM days, his new strength pulsed through his limbs, steady and sharp. The army barely had time to shift, barely had time to breathe, and he was already halfway to the warehouse, a flash of orange and silver cutting straight toward the heart of the Brotherhood's operation. The broken walls of the warehouse creaked and groaned, steel beams bending from the sheer force of the earlier battle outside. Dust drifted through the dim interior as Naruto stepped forward. His crimson Rinna Sharingan spinning slowly, cutting through the gloom like a blade through fog. His gaze swept across the structure, layers of the building stripping away in his mind's eye until the hidden parts of the warehouse were revealed. A large, shielded chamber deep below ground pulsed faintly with energy signatures, the lab. That was his target. That's where the weapon had to be. But as he shifted to move, the air shifted too. Heavy footfalls echoed through the empty space. A voice, sharp and guttural, rolled out first. "You didn't think you'd just waltz through here, did you?" Naruto's eyes flicked forward as Sabertooth stepped into view, a wide, almost animalistic grin curling under his sharp canines. He wasn't alone. From the far left, Juggernaut's massive frame emerged, his bulk practically bending the metal catwalk under his boots. His helmet glinted faintly under the broken lights, the red plating chipped and dented from previous fights, but the confidence in his walk was untarnished. And sliding down gracefully from a beam above, landing with unnatural poise, was Mystique. Her yellow eyes gleamed as if the whole thing amused her. Naruto's gaze swept over them, relaxed, but focused. "TCH, I guess I should have expected the welcoming committee." Mystique tilted her head, folding her arms loosely as she strolled closer. "You've caused quite the mess, you know." "Impressive for one man. But this is where your fun ends." Sabertooth let out a low chuckle. "You should have stayed down, can't heal if you're just dust on the floor." Juggernaut slammed one heavy fist into his open palm, the sound like two boulders colliding. "Hope you've said your goodbyes." Naruto didn't flinch, rolling his neck lazily. Funny, that's exactly what I was about to say to you. The tension coiled, thick and heavy. No one moved. Not yet. Mystique's smile didn't falter, eyes sharp, watching every twitch in Naruto's muscles. Sabretooth slowly cracked his knuckles, ready to spring. And then, without warning, Sabretooth moved first. A violent burst of speed, claws outstretched, his figure a blur aiming for Naruto's throat. Naruto's eyes glowed, the Rinne Sharingan spinning faster, battle officially begun. They dropped in. Juggernaut landed like a meteor, cratering the concrete beneath him. Sabretooth darted from the shadows on his left. What he thought was Sabretooth again came for him, only this time with a high-flying kick. It surprised him, but he was able to block it, realizing it was Mystique. So this was their plan: the two big guys would use brute force, while Mystique would try and confuse him. Wouldn't work. He weaved through the first strike, Juggernaut's massive fist whistling past his ear. The shockwave split the air behind him, toppling a cargo container like it was cardboard. Chakra surged through Naruto's limbs, his body sharpened to a blur of counter-movements. Sabretooth's claws sliced into nothing but wind as Naruto bent backward, hands bracing the ground before vaulting into a sideways roll. Another surprising attack, from two juggernauts now, or Mystique wearing the big guy's face. They hurled two fists at him, but last minute, one of them shifted into a leg sweep. That's her, he muttered under his breath, sliding to a halt. He planted his feet. Black bones of energy appeared in a rush behind him, ribs forming midair. The ribs of his skeletal Susanoo fully formed blocked the first strike, and he jumped away from the kick before kicking the fake away. The ground shattered with the impact. While Mystique was blown away, Juggernaut staggered back from his own blow. Sabretooth reappeared at Naruto's back, claws primed to gut him. Naruto didn't even flinch. His Kamui activated mid-step, Sabretooth's arms passed through him like smoke. Naruto spun, his Rasengan already whirling in his hand, slamming it into the mutant's gut and sending him hurling through two steel pillars. Mystique came again, shifting into Natasha this time. She mimicked her movements too well, too quickly. For anyone else, it might have worked. But Naruto saw it all. The way her right foot dragged half a second too late, the subtle difference in chakra threads. With a flick of his fingers, the space around her bent. He was behind her before she noticed. His palm met the back of her head, gently, disarmingly. You're not her. She crumpled. He then turned to Juggernaut, the man finally back to his full stance after the first counter. Naruto's rib cage defense disappeared, and with a twitch of his eyes he muttered under his breath. Amaterasu. The bug man's army burst into white flames. He panicked for the first few seconds, before he was knocked out. Whether from heat or fear Naruto didn't know, but he stopped the flames right after. Silence fell over the battlefield. A few embers of Amaterasu still burned on the walls. Debris littered the floor like the wreckage of a collapsed world. The three mutants lay unconscious, battered but breathing. Naruto stood at the heart of the chaos, his chakra still simmering around him like a sun on the verge of collapsing. His breath was steady. His eyes burned. No more delays. He turned toward the warehouse, ready for the last opponent. Ready for whoever started all this. Naruto stepped into the lab's hollow core, surrounded by the quiet hum of steel and low, pulsing light. It wasn't the kind of lair he expected from someone responsible for so much destruction. There were no grand banners, no monologue waiting in the air. Just silence. And then he saw him, an old man, standing alone among the suspended slabs of metal and surgical tables. As if he belonged to the architecture more than the earth. Magneto. No fanfare, no gasp of surprise, just the settling of a truth Naruto had carried quietly in the back of his mind for weeks. Of course it was him. He'd heard of Magneto when he first began rescuing mutants, always secondhand, always with a kind of awe in their voices. He had been a symbol once. A name uttered with respect, sometimes even fear, but not hate. Not then. That came later. Slowly, stories shifted. Reverence turned to avoidance. The man who had stood for mutant kind, vanished. Now, standing here, Naruto saw no villain, just a shadow of the man those stories once described. A man who had once tried to shape the world and now looked like the weight of it had finally begun to shape him. Magneto didn't lift a hand in threat. He simply gestured to the table beside him. On it rested a sealed vial, silver fluid swirling with faint red pulses. A prototype. A finished one. The drug, the bioweapon designed to wipe out humanity. Naruto could feel it. Not chakra, not energy, but intention. Desperation crafted into chemistry. This is the only way, Magneto said, voice low, measured, tired. The only way mutants will ever have peace, let me do this. Naruto didn't answer right away. He studied him, his stance, the slight shake in his shoulders, the bags beneath his eyes. He wasn't trying to sell it. Wasn't making a villain's speech. There was no grandeur to this plea. Only weariness. You knew who I was, Naruto finally said, quiet but curious. You didn't look surprised when I showed up. I heard about you 5 years ago, Magneto answered. The man who took in the lost ones. Who gave them food, shelter, purpose. I watched from afar, and I thought, finally, someone else was willing to carry the burden. So I stepped back, I thought I could rest. He looked at Naruto then, truly looked, with a weight that felt like expectation years in the making. But when I realized you weren't fixing it, when I saw the world turning on them again, locking them away, hunting them, I knew I couldn't stay silent. Naruto's gaze hardened slightly. What problem are you trying to fix? Magneto's eyes narrowed. The human race. Naruto sighed. It wasn't out of anger, it was disappointment, sadness. Maybe you were someone they looked up to, he said, stepping closer. You still are, somewhere inside, you're still that man. But right now, you're a bad role model. Magneto didn't flinch. Naruto's voice softened, but the conviction in it held firm. The human race isn't the problem, it's the way they see mutants. And I'll change that. Magneto's jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. I've heard that before, he murmured. From dreamers, from fighters, from fools. I trusted that hope once. I can't again. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, weighted by the moment and everything that came before it. Both of them stood at the edge of history, two men who had fought for the same cause, now separated by belief and consequence. Naruto's eyes didn't leave him. Then I'll show you, he said. One last time. The fight began without ceremony. Before Naruto could take a breath, metal shrieked from all corners of the lab, blades, beams, plates, wires, twisting like serpents around him. They moved with the precision of a surgeon's hand, no wasted motion. Magneto didn't need theatrics, he simply commanded the world's oldest weapon and obeyed a logic honed by decades of war. In a blink, Naruto was engulfed. A great clump of metal slammed shut around him like a coffin, layers folding over each other with bone-grinding pressure. The weight was immense, crushing in from every side. His ribs strained. Muscles fought against steel that screamed under its own force. This wasn't ordinary metal, it was guided by will and fury, manipulated to kill gods if needed. Outside the trap, Magneto stood still, eyes distant. I didn't want it to come to this, he said. But you're young, you still believe change can be begged for, earned. You think compassion is strong enough to endure when the knives come out. The coils of iron groaned louder, compressing further. I've watched them slaughter our kind. I've buried friends, allies, children. I've seen what happens when we wait. They do not fear us, not enough. Most don't even know we exist, and if they don't fear us, they will never respect us. Inside the metal, Naruto's eyes stayed closed, but his mind wasn't quiet. He reached inward. Past the pain, past the suffocating pressure. He found the roar. The beast was always there, ancient and terrible. The 10 tails stirred as if it had been waiting. Its chakra didn't flow gently. It surged, cracking through every muscle fiber in Naruto's body with white-hot intensity. This time, it wasn't reluctant, it didn't resist, it burned. A low rumble echoed in the lab. Then light exploded. The metal began to smoke, then glow red, then melt. Chunks of it sloughed away as something monstrous tore out from within. Chakra cloaked Naruto in a shapeless storm, shifting and snarling like living flame, not red or blue but something deeper, something white and ancient, like bone turned to fire. The very air trembled around him. With a single, blinding lunge, Naruto shot forward. Magneto's eyes widened, but only a fraction too late. Naruto's hand speared forward, cutting through the haze, through Magneto's defenses, through the very air between them, until his palm struck true and clean, piercing straight through Magneto's chest. There was no time for words. Only the breath Magneto couldn't draw. The chakra around Naruto hissed softly, quieting like a predator that had already fed. Magneto's body sagged, suspended for a moment in the grip of the boy who was never supposed to win this way. Naruto's gaze met his. There was no hate in it. Only sorrow. And silence fell once more. Naruto stood still, Magneto's body crumpled gently to the floor behind him, the breath of life already gone. There was no joy in the kill, no righteousness, no vindication. Just necessity. His hand, still flickering faintly with the 10 tails burning chakra, trembled as the last of the old man's warmth left his palm. He didn't close his eyes in respect, he couldn't, not yet. It wasn't for a message, Naruto thought. It was because danger never sleeps. Even in his short time on this earth, in this fractured world of divided genes and wary governments, Naruto had learned enough. Danger didn't always scream its name. Sometimes, it came in the form of tired men who'd seen too much, men who had once tried to save people, until saving turned to control, and control turned to annihilation. Magneto wasn't a madman, that was what made him dangerous. If Naruto had walked away, captured him, spared him, there would always be another attempt. Another gathering of power. Another chance to tip the scales. And Magneto, no matter how aged or weary, wouldn't have stopped. He would have broken free. The Brotherhood would have regrown. And one slip, just one, and humanity could have vanished in a breath. This was mercy for both sides. Naruto exhaled, gaze settling on the center of the lab, the rows of metal cases and stacked canisters, all part of the bioweapon Magneto had nearly completed. The thing meant to wipe out an entire species. There could be no trace left behind. No blueprint. No loose thread for someone else to find years later. He moved quickly, silently. The unconscious bodies of Juggernaut, Sabretooth, and Mystique were still inside, lying near the cooling shadow of the lab wall. Without hesitation, Naruto raised a hand, space warping with a ripple of Kamui chakra, and the 3 villains vanished from the building, cast onto the dirt outside like fallen kings stripped of their thrones. Then, in one smooth motion, Naruto appeared in the air above. He didn't speak, didn't charge with flair or theatrics. He extended his arm, palm open, and a swirling mass of chakra erupted to life, a Rasengan like none before it, colossal and pure, glowing a furious white with threads of the 10 tails raw, searing power laced into its core. It crackled in the sky like a newborn star. He let it fall. The Rasengan smashed into the building with a scream of energy that tore the world open. Fire and light surged in every direction. The warehouse didn't explode, it disintegrated, consumed in a flash of chakra and fury until there was nothing left but a crater, the wind howling over scorched earth. He landed with weight in his step, the dust and heat curling away from his feet like fog bowing to a storm. Ahead of him stood all that remained, his team and the crowd of mutants, some still battle-worn, others too shocked to speak. Naruto said nothing yet. His eyes swept over them, Storm, X-23, Darwin, Natasha, all quiet, waiting for what came next. And as the wind carried the last of the burning ash into the sky, Naruto faced them, the silence heavy with the echo of a war just ended. Naruto stood tall at the edge of the scorched crater, the dust settling behind him as dozens, maybe hundreds, of mutants stared back in tense silence. Some were bruised, others wide-eyed, uncertain, all of them trying to understand what had just happened. The building was gone. The Brotherhood's base, its weapon, its symbol, all erased. Naruto took one step forward, his voice rising, not as a command, but a presence, firm and carrying over the wind. Their weapon is gone, he said. And their leader is dead. No cheering followed, just breath held in the air. Truth didn't always come with celebration. He continued, I won't sugarcoat it. Shield's probably gonna want a bunch of you locked up. They're gonna lump the crimes of a few onto the many, because that's how scared people work. They see fire and assume everyone holding a match started it. His eyes passed across the crowd, not accusing, not judging. Just looking. Seeing the uncertainty written in their shoulders. The grief. The confusion. But I'm not Shield, I'm not Fury, and I'm not gonna chase you all down for fighting in a war you didn't even start. His voice sharpened a little, clearer, if you didn't kill innocents, if you didn't torture, or enslave, or build that weapon, I'm not gonna treat you like you did. I'm offering you a place. He paused, letting that sink in. A home. Some murmurs rippled through the crowd. X-23 folded her arms. Darwin watched quietly. Storm stepped a little closer to Natasha. Naruto raised his voice, not louder, but fuller. I'm not your new leader, I'm not Magneto's replacement, I'm just a guy who thinks mutants and humans don't have to kill each other to exist. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I am saying it's possible. If you don't believe in humans, fine. Just believe in me for 5 minutes, give my island a chance. He gave a small grin then, boyish, honest, and somehow more dangerous than any threat. Because if you decide to run, I will chase you. A few chuckles broke through the tension. Someone scoffed near the back. Naruto rolled his shoulder and added. 5-minute head start if you go now, stretch those legs, pretend you've got a shot. He winked, grin widening just enough to leave them wondering if he was joking. I'll still catch you. And for the first time since the building fell, something shifted in the air, not fear, but something gentler. Possibility. Some mutants began to relax, others remained skeptical, unsure. But they were listening. Naruto watched a few figures break away from the crowd, their hesitant steps turning into a sprint toward the forests that surrounded the charred battlefield. Most of them wouldn't get far, he knew that. Still, he sighed, not out of disappointment, but understanding. Some people just didn't want peace. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Still, his grin stayed. Without a word, he created several shadow clones. A handful silently dispersed into the trees, tasked with following the runners from the shadows, not to attack, just to track. 3 others turned and walked toward the unconscious bodies of Mystique, Sabretooth, and the towering Juggernaut. they'd be dealt with properly. With that handled, Naruto leapt across the scorched ground to regroup with his team near the wreckage's edge. The sky was dimming, painted in bruised purples and reds, another day fading, another war ended. Natasha stood waiting for him, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. "You sure that was a good idea?" "Yep," Naruto said without hesitation, that familiar fox-like grin flashing back onto his face. Natasha narrowed her eyes. "They're dangerous." "I know, that's why I let the worst of them run. They'll lead Fury's people right to anyone we missed. And the ones that stayed," he shrugged. "They either want peace, or they're just tired. Either way, we'll find out." Storm stepped forward next, her expression calm but questioning. "What about the other mutants on your island, the ones who've always wanted peace? What are they going to think, bringing the Brotherhood in?" Naruto looked up at the sky for a moment, then answered plainly. "I'm no hero, just a cocky bastard with a simple moral compass. North points to help who needs it. South points to beat the hell out of anyone who threatens it." He looked her dead in the eye, sincere beneath the grin. "I'm okay with lying to the ones who want me to be more than that. I ain't their leader, never claimed to be, I just gave them a home." There was a pause, heavy and quiet, before Naruto's gaze moved to Darwin, Storm, and X-23. His tone was lighter now, but genuine. "So, what about you three, are you staying on the island, or leaving with the wind?" Storm gave a soft smile. "I already told you, I've got a home of my own, and a people that still need me." "Fair enough," Naruto nodded. "You always were a storm that didn't stay in one place long." Laura spoke next, her voice quieter. "I was hoping to go with Natasha. There's still a lot I need to fix, stuff I need to do before I even think about peace." Naruto watched her as she spoke, her voice low, controlled, like someone who'd taught themselves never to show too much. But he caught it. The faintest hesitation, the twitch in her jaw, the way her hands flexed just slightly at her sides. Not fear, guilt, a weight she carried in silence. He remembered the files Natasha had shown him, who she was before they brought her back. She'd been a weapon, raised and controlled, pointed like a blade at anyone someone else deemed an enemy. He had almost forgot she was like him. Being a child built to kill, being punished for surviving it. All of it came together in his mind like puzzle pieces slotting into place. The way she avoided eye contact. The long stare she gave to those who looked at her like a ticking bomb. The way she never said home unless she meant Natasha. His gaze softened. Then, quietly, he tilted his head and asked, "Are the memories of what they made you do that bad?" She didn't answer, just looked away, eyes dark. He didn't press. Then he turned to Darwin, raising an eyebrow. "And you?" Darwin gave a tired chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've had enough of solitude to last a lifetime. An island full of weirdos and wild powers sounds like my kind of crowd right now." Naruto's grin returned, wider, warmer. "Good," he said simply. "It'll be nice having someone who can't die watching my back." They stood there for a beat, silence stretching comfortably between them. The war might have ended, but something else was just beginning. Something that felt, strangely, like home. As the group began to disperse, Storm giving one last nod before taking to the sky, Darwin walking toward the others with that reluctant acceptance in his step, and Lura lingering by the Quinjet in thought, Naruto stayed back. Just a few feet behind, arms crossed, golden hair tousled by the breeze coming off the ruined battlefield. Natasha stepped beside him silently, arms behind her back, eyes fixed on the horizon where smoke still drifted from the remains of the warehouse. The quiet between them wasn't heavy, it was earned. The kind that came after chaos, when everything had settled just enough to breathe. "You really think they'll change?" she asked finally, not looking at him. Naruto shrugged, not all of them, some will need more time. Some probably won't change at all. She raised an eyebrow, and you're okay with that? No, he said, glancing over at her with a smirk. But I've accepted it. You can't fix everyone, you just give them the chance to fix themselves, that's all we can really do. Natasha nodded slightly, lips tightening, not in disagreement, but in understanding. Her eyes lingered on the gathering mutants, some helping the injured, some keeping to themselves, all of them uncertain of what came next. You gave them a place, even when you knew some of them didn't deserve it, she said. Naruto glanced up at the sky. Yeah, but I'll be watching, I always do. A quiet chuckle escaped her lips. You really like playing protector. He smiled, the wind brushing against the worn edges of his cloak. Like I said when this mission first started, I'm the only one that will try, until someone better shows up. She turned to him finally, arms still behind her back. You know, I never said thanks. Pretty sure you did. No, not for saving Laura, I mean for not trying to carry it all alone, she said. For making Furry make me join you on this mission. Naruto paused, the grin fading into something quieter. You were never just backup, I couldn't have done this without you. She gave him a half smile. Well, don't get used to it, I've still got my own mess to clean up. He looked at her then, really looked, saw the fire behind her calm, the strength in her restraint. You ever need help with that mess, you know where to find me. Natasha's smile deepened, just a fraction. Yeah, I do. And with that, they stood side by side for just a moment longer, staring out into the uncertain future they'd helped shape, imperfect, cracked, but still standing. That's it for today. I hope you liked the video. Please like and subscribe, and comment ideas if you can, and maybe you could share this with your friends, because you never know, they might like what ifs too. So without further ado, AllKage, out.